Welcome back to Virtue and Victory. In our last conversation, we discussed the Stoic virtue of wisdom. Today, we focus on courage, a foundational Stoic virtue that helps us face fear, uncertainty, and adversity. As always, this is a discussion, and we invite you to be part of a virtuous cosmopolis where we reflect on life lessons, business strategy, and looking at chess as a model. So, what does it mean to be courageous? Is it just about taking risks, or is there more to it? Adam, glad to be with you again to talk about courage. So we have this question. I think we need to define first what is courage, and so what did the Stoics tell us about courage?
Hey Doug, welcome to the audience. Great to be here this week. Stoics believe that virtue is the highest good, right? We talk a lot about living a virtuous life and prioritizing having an excellent character, right? And so Stoics believe that every situation in life is an opportunity to respond with virtue. Stoics believe that courage is a strength of character that helps people rise above challenges and commit to what needs to be done, right? There's a couple of ways I slice that up. Courage helps us balance fear, not eliminate it, is how a Stoic would look at it. Um, Throughout history, when heroes are interviewed, so many of them say, I was just doing my job, or
Mm.
I was just doing the right thing, or I was just doing what anybody else would do. Right? And I think what I reflect on personally is when people have said I was being courageous, or people have complimented me for something I did, that they say, "Oh, you're really, really brave," or "You're really bold," or "That was super courageous." I'll tell you that when that happens the most, I don't feel brave.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I was just doing the right thing. I feel like I was just doing what anybody else would have done. I feel at peace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a Stoic would say courage is balancing bravery with fear in a very virtuous, tranquil, calm way. That's maybe how I would think about it, and I think it's important to reflect on it often. Marcus Aurelius talked a lot about just living, doing the right thing, moving forward, taking the time to do what the needful was. Right? There's quote after quote after quote from Marcus where he just talks about doing the right thing. Get busy with life's purpose, toss aside empty hopes, get active in your own rescue. That's a quote from Marcus Aurelius, right? Seneca said, begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life, right? Over and over and over again, they talk about just living and doing and moving.
Mm-hmm.
Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to throw away. Death stands at your elbow. Be good for something while you live, and it is in your power to do so. Marcus Aurelius, right? And so I think honestly, the more I started to overcomplicate this whole Stoic virtue of courage this last week, as I've been meditating on this podcast, on this episode, I go back to the simplicity of living, doing the right thing, living a virtuous life, having excellent character, balancing whenever you are afraid of something, or whenever something seems scary, pausing, getting yourself in a good place mentally, and making the right decision. And that's brave. That's courageous.
I think doing the right thing comes from discipline, and that's really been a theme of what we've been speaking about when we think about the Stoics is being prepared so that we in our last episode we talked about our whys. We know what the right thing is to do, and now we're talking about courage. Is that when it's time to act? Virtue is in the doing, and we'll talk about that today, about kind of showing up in these moments. One of the philosophies that I've really held on to from Seneca is we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And I think there's a variation of that quote where it's like, when we overthink things or when we fear something, we suffer twice and maybe more than necessary, because you're suffering before the thing even happens. And then just doing the thing or showing up to the thing often might be different than what we make it in our imagination.
You're absolutely right. I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
I was with my family. We were driving. This is when we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. We were driving into San Francisco. Um, I ride motorcycles. Ridden motorcycles a long time. Love my Harley. Um, Group of motorcycle passes us on the highway heading towards the Bay Bridge. Okay, that
Mm-hmm.
crosses over from the Oakland area into San Francisco. And this group of motorcycles, probably 10 or 15 motorcycles, fly through, filtering through traffic, right? Because there's always a lot of traffic in the area. They filter through, a little dangerous, but they're on motorcycles. They're used to what they do. So I totally can relate and get it. About 4 or 5 minutes later, people start slamming on their brakes, and we happen upon one of the motorcyclists who had just gotten hit by a car, and everyone's panicking. There's a lot of chaos. Without hesitation, again, I'm not a hero, nothing like that. That's not what I want people to think or even reflect on. Without hesitation, I pull over, hit my flashers, walk over to the guy who has his bones sticking out of his leg. It was a very bad injury. It was extremely bad. And he looked up at me. There were a couple of people around who were panicking, couldn't talk to him. I looked at him and he looked at me and said, "How bad is it? Am I going to be okay?" I said, "Sir, you're going to be just fine. It's not as bad as you think it is. We're going to get the authorities here to help you momentarily. In the meantime, we're going to keep you safe. Do you need any water? Do you need a drink of anything? Can I get you something?" He's like, "Yes, I need a drink of water." Okay. Because you want to keep them out of shock, right? You want to keep them focused on something other than the injury and the gravity of the situation, right? And so without hesitation, I got him some water, started guiding traffic, taking the lead in the middle of this extremely chaotic Bay Bridge situation, right? Um, Took about 5 to 7 minutes for the authorities to show up, and I handed it off to Highway Patrol, handed it off to Fire, and I left, right? I'm sure the guy ended up being okay. Everything probably turned out. But the reality of it is, when I get back in the car, the kids are in there, the wife, my kids are like, "Oh, Dad, how did you know what to do?" Right? And I just said, it was just the right thing to do. Nobody was guiding traffic. No one was making sure the guy was safe. Nobody was making sure that he didn't go into shock. And so you've got to take action, and you just have to do the right thing, right? Well, how do you know what the right thing is? And for me, I think it's very natural in those circumstances to make good decisions when you're in tune with really who you are when you spend time meditating, right? There's account of after account of Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, um, speaking about every morning waking up early and meditating, anticipating what are the challenges he'd be met with that day, and almost making decisions beforehand of what he was going to do when those challenges came up. And then it makes it real simple to say, "I'm just going to do the right thing." And I know what the right thing is because I've visualized some of these challenges.
It's action in the face of fear. And a key point really want to highlight, because I think that you really got to the crux of it. And this is fundamental to the Stoics. And it has, tastes of memento mori involved in it. It's visualizing, it's meditating, it's being thoughtful and disciplining your mind ahead of time. So when the moment occurs, you're ready. And when you're ready, you show up. And so when I think about courage, I would just tell people the first thing is showing up, because that's more than half the battle. If you do not show up, you've already conceded. And I genuinely believe, in my experience and for those of others, when you show up, you either win the moment or you learn from it. I see this all the time, whether conducting business, we're in business meetings, you have a presentation. It's fine to be a little bit stressed, to get anxious. In fact, I kind of try to channel that, or just showing up to support somebody else. I believe in cheering others on, clapping for them. And of course, we see it in competitions. I mean, tons of examples in sports competitions, or you mentioned like getting ready for battle. And here on Virtue and Victory, we're chess enthusiasts. So I do want to highlight how we see this play out over the board. For me, and I think many people listening, you hate when you lose. To me, it's a true stinger. I mean, I've shown up over the board in tournaments, even online play, and then I get beat, and I'm just like, man. Uh, but like a great workout, and I've said this all the time, and I just think about my life is, sometimes we don't want to work out or we want to do the thing. I've never regretted after the workout. Sometimes it's hard to get there, but when I show up and, even if my body's aching afterwards, I've never regretted showing up. There's always many lessons of what I could have done better, but I wouldn't even have the chance to reflect on what I could have done better if I didn't show up, if I wasn't there. And so that brings me to the magician from Riga. Bonus points for anybody who knows who that is before I say his name. Mikhail Tal. And he's one of the great chess players that comes to mind when I think about courageous play. And there's a particular game I like to highlight for this conversation. It was Mikhail versus Smyslov. And that was in the 1959 Candidates Tournament, which in and itself reminds me that before you can be a champion, you need to be a challenger. And that's like, to me, that's, you got to show up there. In that game, Tal embodied bold, fearless play. And Tal is known, and the reason they call him the magician is he's known for sacrificing pieces. I've seen a meme where it's just him throwing pieces out there, but he seizes the initiative. And in this game, which he not only won the Candidates Tournament to go on to be the next champion, but the game won Excellency Award for play. He took a lot of risks, but they paid off spectacularly. And he was a very aggressive player, but I want to be very clear. Tal is also known as being a deep calculator. So when we say about being brave and courageous, it's not about just being foolish, right? There's some sayings about like the difference between being brave and foolish might be a thin line, but Tal calculated. In fact, he used calculation plus his intuition. We mentioned this before. You don't know the outcome. You don't know the future. And that's where the courage comes in life and in business. You got to trust judgment and you have to take decisive action. You mentioned that. And this is where I think people define bravery, where you're doing the right thing. In that story with the motorcyclist who got in an accident, there was an outcome that you probably saw open up in front of you. Like, hey, this is chaotic. I hope he's okay. Hope is not a strategy. How do we ensure he's okay? How do we ensure the best outcome? And so in the game that I'm talking about here, Tal took control. He didn't allow his opponent to dictate the game. And this echoes the Stoic virtue of courage, when it's not about reacting. You mentioned this a lot, but it's about facing adversity proactively, shaping one's own fate. I love what you said, which is take action and being in your own rescue, right? Don't hope and wait for somebody else to come in. And there's always risk. But as I mentioned, it's not about being reckless. In this game and in many games of Tal, it played out. But just kind of thinking about, we always use chess as a model for business and life.
Yeah.
I think this is where tons of stories, we talk about heroes in sports or at battle. Business, there's a ton of case studies of bold leadership, because it's hard to sacrifice short-term security for long-term growth.
Yeah.
We saw this over the chessboard. There's a lot of gambits. There's a lot of principled chess play where you may sacrifice a piece or a position because you see the path, because you've already visualized this. And Adam, if I could, and I think we always appreciate when there's personal studies or stories that we can ground ourselves in. I think it's been about a year. You personally made a bold career change. Would you care to share more about kind of that decision and where you are in your journey?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share a little bit if it's of use to folks. After a couple decade career in big corporate business, rising to the C-suite, I was reflecting on, was it really what I wanted in life? Was that really how I wanted to spend the rest of my life, doing the things that I needed to do in order to be successful in the
Mm-hmm.
eyes of the corporation, in the eyes of the world? And the more I reflected on it, the more I realized that the work I was doing just didn't align to who I was as a person and the character of who I was as a person. And in that moment of realization, it was very quick and easy to admit personally first that um, there was only one answer to what I needed to do next, right? And again, it just felt very natural. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what I will say is that the more prepared somebody is, the more research they've done, the more studying they've done, the more preparation they've done, the easier it becomes to make those kind of bold decisions, right? One thing that I reflect on often, I think it's Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan, one of these great basketball players, maybe it's Steph Curry, I don't know. Um, they expect every single shot they take to go in,
Mm.
right? Like they don't think they're going to miss. That's why they shoot so often because they expect. And if that one didn't go in, the next one's going to go in. If that one doesn't go in, the next one's going to go in. And they constantly think and know and believe the shot's going to land. And that's what sets them apart. But they're able to have that level of confidence because they've taken, I'd venture to say, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of shots, right? And so the reality is, when I left my big corporate job on my terms, my decision, something I had to do a year ago, was there some fear of the unknown of what was going to happen? Yeah. Had I prepared a little bit and been really thoughtful about what moves I was going to make in order to continue to keep food on the table, pay the bills, have some financial security, yeah, I made moves. But I'll tell you, a year later, the ways I'm making money to pay my bills and provide food and security for my children are very different than what I had originally thought. And so I think the story, without going into a ton of detail, is I am so glad I did what I did and left big corporate America. Um, will I ever go back to corporate America? I don't know. I don't know. Um, could I? Absolutely. Will I? I don't know. Um, I've prioritized the character of who I am. I've prioritized my contributions to others. I've prioritized putting others way before myself in so many ways. Um, and yes, there have been moments of fear, moments of anxiety, moments of, well, what if this doesn't work out? And it's been such a beautiful opportunity to me to practice the Stoic virtues: wisdom, courage, moderation, temperance, justice, in so many ways. And what it's really done is allowed me to just continuously move forward, continue moving. And there's been a lot of early mornings and a lot of late nights and a lot of meditation, a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions. Um, And it's been just a phenomenal, like I said, opportunity to apply the Stoic teachings and the Stoic virtues. So, Meditations, book 12, verse 22. Consider that everything is opinion, and opinion is in thy power. Take away then, when thou choosest, thy opinion, and like a mariner who has doubled the promontory, thou wilt find calm, everything stable, and a waveless bay. And so it's been an opportunity to really find that inner peace that allows me to respond to things in the most thoughtful, most likely to succeed ways. Right? And that's what this practicing the Stoic virtues have done for me the last year. Is taking off that security belt, um, or that security blanket, right? I always told folks that comfort was the biggest enemy to true success and true happiness. It's comfortable showing up for the same job day after day after day in a lot of ways. It's comfortable having that biweekly paycheck. It's comfortable having, the things that we acquire, right? But at the end of the day, as a Stoic, you step back and you say, these are all just things. A car is a hunk of metal and gas, right? A Rolex is a hunk of metal and some precious metals, right? At the end of the day, all these things are just material, and they don't really matter at the end of the day. And we're all working so hard chasing those consumer goods, those tangible items that are really just hunk of metal and plastic and hunk of, whatever. And and it drives a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, a lot of fear, a lot of problems for people. And I think that's reflected in our society. And so I decided to make the decision. I made the decision, um, to walk a little different of a path. And I've found a lot of joy in that path and a lot of joy in doing the right thing always, no matter what, and being able to do the right thing always, no matter what.
Yeah. Well, I think doing the right thing, which may not always be clear, is exactly what we're talking about all the time. And there are a lot of distractions in life, especially today's society. And so we always ask the question, how do I know what the right thing to do? And that's the discussion. It's already been laid out before us. I like frameworks. They help us to organize our mind and our thoughts. Again, that's discipline of the mind leads its way to that clarity so that we can focus on the right things and take the right actions when those times come to us. You mentioned some sports greats. I believe it was Wayne Gretzky who said you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And then it was Michael Jordan who had a statement about, um, everybody's talking about the shots I make, but they don't talk about the shots I did make. And I certainly didn't make 100% of them, right? And if I remember correctly, in basketball, something from the stat line, it's like you're really good if you're like 50% from the 3-point line. Like if
Yeah.
you make 50% of the shots, that's already great. So I think that's really interesting. It made me think. We like book recommendations. Think Like a Freak. It's about behavioral economics, and the first chapter in the first book, the authors might not have known this, so maybe we tag them and get their thoughts. But they were really talking about courage, about doing the right thing. So in the first chapter, they put you in a setting. You're a goaltender in the World Cup final, and you're in penalty kicks. If you save the ball, you're a hero, national hero. You win the World Cup. If you allow the ball to get into the net, nobody will remember your name. And then they break down statistically the safest place to stay statistically is the center of the net. That if they stay in the center of the net, they have a higher statistical chance of saving the ball. The kicker, from their viewpoint, they have a higher statistical chance of making a goal if they kick in the center of the net. But they always go for like the top right, top left. It's a
Hmm.
riskier shot, but if they hit it, they're more likely to score, but they're less likely to hit it. The accuracy is usually off, and the goaltender almost never stays in the center of the net. They always feel they have to kind of commit to one way or another, and you see them they've already pre-chosen which way they're going to move, and it's kind of now down to the fate of it all. So what's the decision you're going to make? If you had the best information, what would you do? And you have the best people, just as you mentioned great names: Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Steph Curry. They've disciplined themselves. They visualized it. They put in the work. So when it comes down to the moment, they're ready to go. And I think that's when we think about courageous decision making. Here's the framework, right? And I always share this as advice to people too: is the beauty is in the doing, right? Because your choice is do something, do nothing. And when you choose to do something, you should do it with full conviction. And so here you go, right? You should not be reckless. By the way, we're not advocating recklessness. We're saying assess the risk. What do you know? What don't you know? Do you have a fear? Is it rational, right? Is this an emotional fear, or is there something I should really be concerned about? Do I have contingencies? A lot of people ask themselves, but what if I fail? I would ask you, what if you succeed? What's the best thing that can happen? And then when you commit to it, again, acting with that conviction, and you know be careful of how you hedge yourself. I think that was one thing you mentioned. When I think about what your story that you shared, it was not easy. Your motivations may be different. You mentioned getting out of your comfort zone, because there is comfort. I think when I think about comfort zone, I always think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Hmm.
And as you climb the ladder, and you have to, if you want to self actualize, which is the top, that's when you're at your best. If you want to be at your best, you have to get away from just thinking about these physical needs, which is at the bottom of that hierarchy. And we're blessed that we're able to, right? I don't have to worry about food or shelter. So I get to think about these other things. And I really think folks should evaluate where they are, what their motivations and what they're trying to attain, and then thinking about that commitment and the virtue of action, despite fear.
I mean, those are all phenomenal points, and it's a lot to reflect on. And I like how you talk about assessing the risk. I mean, isn't that just your morning meditation? Isn't that
Mm,
what that time should be used for, right? Evaluating the upside. Well, what's the best that could happen? And why don't we just expect that to happen? Now, that's a trained skill
hmm
to do that, right? You have to train yourself. And that's what a lot of this conversation is about in Stoicism. It's controlling what you can, which is how you think about something,
Yeah,
right? I mean, there's so many books been written, so many things you could read about it, so many teachings out there, but it's all boiled up to the same thing. Control this. Expect the best to happen. And if it
expect the
doesn't,
best.
expect the best to happen the next time. And if it doesn't, then the next time. And keep going until the best does happen. But
hmm
people end up stopping just before they make that shot. They end up stopping because it is frustrating. It doesn't feel good to get beat up. It doesn't feel good to fail. It doesn't feel good to have to say, yeah, maybe I made a mistake. Like it doesn't feel good because we're so worried about what other people will think about us, right?
That's right.
And what they found is that it's not fear that people failure isn't what people fear. It's what people are going to think about them
That's
for
right.
failing that they fear. And so if you change the way you think about and care about what people think, and you change the way you think about the actions you take, that it's just a stepping stone. They talk about it as a growth mindset. Instead of seeing it as this utter failure, see it as a growth opportunity. Well, it's another step up because I'm not going to make that same mistake again. Therefore, I'm a better person and I'm moving up that ladder, right? And so every opportunity, every missed shot is a shot to tweak something in order to make sure the next one goes in, or the next one, or the next one, or the next one, right? And so I like how you laid that out. But that's what our meditations in the morning are for. That's why we take, whether it's 5 minutes, 2 hours, 30 minutes, to be thoughtful, to read, to meditate, to assess the risk, evaluate the upside, and then decide what move we're going to make today on the chessboard of life. Where are we going to move that piece? What piece is going to get moved, right? And that's what it's all about. And that's what Stoicism is summarized. Being courageous when it would be easier to be fearful.
That's a great question. I think it's a great way. If somebody's asking, where do I start? You mentioned meditation in the morning. That right there, there's your question. Where do I need to make a move? Is it a bold move? And where's the opportunity today uh, to set myself up for future success? Sometimes it's just raising your hand. Sometimes it's just stepping up, speaking up, or taking that calculated risk. And you just mentioned it, right? Is you take those shots, right? Those are the reps. Like I'm taking reps. I miss, I miss, I miss, I make it. Uh, the same thing in our thinking. That muscle gets stronger as we use it. Um, so that meditation is very powerful because you'll be ready to take action when that critical moment comes in. And so I do invite everyone to reflect, share stories with us. We'd love to join with you in the discussion. Um, Mentioned before, we see it, right? Chess and life. Sometimes the scariest move is that first move,
Hmm.
or just doing it. So there's virtue in the doing. Fear, or I should say, courage, is not um, does not exist without fear. And you shared with me some things that stood out with you as being as a girl father. I shouldn't say the girls, right? I think it's being a father of any children. You probably come across a lot of movies. You mentioned something that kind of stuck out to you.
Yeah, it's a good one to share to draw this to a close, right? I think we were watching Mulan with the
Mm-hmm.
girls, and one of the generals was talking to, I think Mulan. I don't know. You'll have to fact check me here, right? We like to be honest about these things, but the way I remember it is, in the show, in the Disney movie, somebody was afraid, and I believe one of the leaders said that, um, very very simply, that there is no courage without fear. Simple. So I'm glad you're afraid. Because you're afraid, you get to be courageous. So let's go do this thing that we need to go do, right? And so just do the right thing. Do the right thing. And the more you're in tune with nature and the natural order of things, the more you strive to live the Stoic values of wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice, the more in tune you will be with what is the courageous thing you should do and what is the right thing to do. And as you prioritize living a life that promotes a good, excellent character, it'll become very natural. As you practice this, the more you practice it, the more you meditate on it, the easier it becomes to just always do the right thing no matter what.